if you want to get rid of the fire, buying a sprinkler system at that moment in time is not going to stop that fire from happening. Sure, once the fire's gone, you can put a sprinkler system in place, but ideally, you put a sprinkler system in place when there is no fire, so that once the fire actually comes, the sprinkler system activates, it extinguishes a fire, and obviously there's going to be some damage, but you're able to minimize that damage. So I guess to start off, Trevor, my question to you is, what is the mindset equivalent of a sprinkler system?
Well, I love the analogy, Theo. And again, thanks for having me on. I love being on the show. And it's really, really important because, you can't literally install that sprinkler system as you're having the freak out or as you're going through, the fire or the journey of, whatever's upsetting you. And you're right. It can be in real estate. It could be in your personal life. It could be in your relationship. It could be in your health. It could be with your children. But for this episode, we're going to really talk about, how it relates to real estate investors. And again, thank you for the warm intro, because I've had a unique perspective, with 20,000 people from around the planet on what allows them to navigate the freak out and what allows them to just, flow through it, remembering that out of all chaos comes order. And it all goes back to really thinking about one thing that, my mentor, Tony Robbins, said, that success is 80% psychology and 20% mechanics. That is 80% mindset and 20% action. So if you really think about that, and we go back to mindset, what are you doing to condition the mind so that when the sprinkler system, is needed, that fire starts burning, you've already got some tools in the toolbox to use to navigate what you need to navigate. Does that resonate with you?
Absolutely. So what are these tools? What are some examples of again, the sprinkler system, things that we can put in place? And it sounds like what you're saying is that, just to kind of summarize what you just said, that basically we're trying to condition ourselves constantly so that whenever an issue happens, we just naturally, in the words that you use, flow through the problem, as opposed to if we've, I guess not conditioning yourself is still a form of conditioning, but if you condition yourself incorrectly, then you are going to, I like what you use, freak out in that situation. And at that point, who really knows what's going to happen? So what can we do to condition ourselves properly?
Well, I think the first thing, and thank you for that, is to really understand that, we're all in real estate and things don't always go in a straight line. Things are going to happen at your properties. Things are going to happen with your property managers. Things are going to happen with the weather. Things are going to happen with an investor that says maybe is coming into your deal with a large sum of money. And, with 48 hours to go, they say, they just can't get access to it. So really, it all starts with understanding that if you've got a belief or you've got a value or a rule that says everything's having to be perfect all the time, you're really setting yourself up for disappointment. Because again, we really, really understand and appreciate that a challenge or a problem is the universe's way of seeing how defiantly committed you are to getting through it or over it or around it or under it. So conditioning a high performance, peak performance mindset in real estate would be no different than a pro hockey player, a pro basketball player, a pro tennis player, a golfer who knows that, sometimes they're going to be putting the ball in the hoop and other times they're going to be going through a scoring drought, or sometimes they're going to get tripped and fall down. But it's really getting yourself up and dusting yourself off and really remembering that, even as a baby learns to walk, and they're literally pulling themselves up on the coffee table and they fall and they tumble over and everything. We don't go, oh, that baby's never going to walk. We still cheerlead them. We applaud them. We get them to, continue to, feel it out until eventually they start walking again. Well, that's the same thing in real estate. If you ever fall down, you've got to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and really understand that there's only 3 things that you need to really remember. And the first thing is that, failure is nothing more than, really understanding that there really is no failure. There's only feedback. And it's an old quote from Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich book, that there is no failure, there's only feedback. And that as real estate investors, we're going to be getting a lot of feedback, each and every day. So number 1, remember there is no failure, there's only feedback. Number 2 is to really understand that we all go into what we call an emotional home when stuff goes upside down. Theo, those people that always seem to get angry and always stay angry. Well, that's their emotional home. Some people, do sadness, they get sad. Some people beat themselves up. And so I invite the listeners to really ask themselves, what's the dominant emotion you fall into? Or what's the emotional home you camp out in anytime things go upside down? And it's not that that emotion is good or bad, right or wrong, but you absolutely have to ask yourself, is staying in this emotion going to help me or hinder me? That means if you camp out there for 2, 3, 4, 5 hours, you're probably cheating yourself out of getting up, getting back on the horse and continuing to ride. So I really ask you to really identify your emotional home and then have the awareness, as almost like you're the observer looking at yourself going, wow, I'm aware that I'm pissed off right now. I'm aware that I'm angry. I'm aware that I just lost some money, or I'm aware that my occupancy isn't as high as it needs to be. But guys, that's an invitation to go back to, what do I really, really, really want to do, and where do I need to go from here? Does that make sense, Theo?
Yeah, so you said number one was there's no failure, only feedback. Number two was the emotional home. And then what was the third one?
We haven't got to it yet. It's really that emotional home is just really being aware that we're human beings and that emotions are there to serve you, right? But for you to stay in a negative emotional home for far too long would be like sitting in your own, manure. You can get out and move beyond that if you choose to. And the third thing is really all about really going to what we call the 3 S words. And Theo, you've heard of these before. Joe's talked about them before. It's where you check in with your state, you check in with your story, and then you check in with your strategy. So let's take a look at all 3 of those, because guys, your state is really your focus. And we often say where focus goes, energy flows. So if you're focused on the problem, you're going to absolutely stay in that problem, right? If you're focused on a negative emotion and being angry, well, you're going to get more of that angry emotion. But if you change your focus, to the polar opposite and ask, what is my outcome and what emotion is going to serve me? And sometimes that emotion or that word we're looking for could be, determination. Sometimes it could be resilience. Sometimes it could be, anything where maybe you've had an experience before, but the minute that you start focusing on the solution, all of that negative emotion starts to dissipate and go away. So the first word is the state management you're in, and you've got to really make sure your focus is on what you want instead of what you don't want. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So if I know, so if I know, for example, that my emotional home is I get angry, right? Yep. Something bad happens. I just start, I take it on other people. I'm irritable, things like that. But obviously I know, like, rationally that's not going to help me.
Correct.
So how do I actually change my state in that time? So I'm angry. I realize that I'm angry. Is it something that the realization stops me being angry, or is it just practice? What exactly what I need to do to make sure that I'm not, taking out my anger, taking out my real estate issues, like on my kids or my wife or something?
That's it. Well, I love the question. And it's really all about this. When you talk about state manage, it's learning to discipline your disappointment. And I want your listeners to write that down, because if you learn to discipline your disappointment, that means that you're not going to lose your what. You're going to absolutely understand that, there are highs and lows in real estate. There's good and there's bad, but that nothing has meaning until we assign it a meaning. Maybe you needed to learn a lesson. Maybe you needed to, have a smaller hiccup now to prevent a bigger hiccup, the next time you buy a 200-unit building. So that's why we always go back to really disciplining your disappointment, is to really not beat yourself up for it, not to blame or shame or to justify, but to get real with it, and not really, dwell on the negative, but say, even though this has happened, right? And even though I may not be happy with what has happened, where do I need to put my intention to move beyond it? That's the first thing. Otherwise, the wife is going to get it, or the husband's going to get it, the kids, the dog, the business partner, and that's just not fair. So that's the first S word. From there, Theo, we go to the second one, and this is the big one. This is the one that I really like to talk about with my clients, or if I'm standing on stages around the world, and that is your story. And your story is really your identity. It's who you are in the moment that stuff starts happening, because most average people become a victim in that moment. And if you live in a victim story or a victim identity or a victim modality, you're going to make choices from that place. Instead, I invite you to get out of being a victim and into what we call being a victor or victorious, because we've all had times before where we've had mistakes, but we've moved beyond them, right? Because you're never really defined by the mistake. And it's not even you that should be, feeling bad about the mistake. The mistake is a mistake, but you shouldn't get into the habit of blaming, shaming, and justifying yourself all the time. So really the identity piece, the story piece is to really remember that there are other people. Even Joe Fairless himself has had to get out of a victim mentality and step into a victor and give himself a powerful name like Joe the Warrior, or something that really makes you feel like you're not in the victim modality, but in the victor mentality to start climbing up the mountain again.